All right, welcome to the Moving Forward podcast with me, your host Corey Cottrell, and my buddy Rio Verdenier, where we get together to talk about. The first series is going to be all about every single one of Andrew Yang's 18 million policies. Actually, I think it's about 110 right now. From the perspective of a dyed-in-the-wool conservative and just a rabid progressive. But today is extremely, extremely special. We have Scott Santens in here to talk to us about universal basic income. I think, honestly, the first time that I heard about universal basic income was from a podcast that I heard you on, Scott, and have just been fascinated with ever since. I think it was about 3 years ago. And so, just man, thank you so much for doing this for me, and for really preaching the gospel about how ridiculously fantastic and transformative this idea can be. I mean, it can, right? Like, there's a reason why once people understand it, they get really, really excited about it. So, Scott, maybe tell me a little bit about how you came to hear about universal basic income and your sort of evolution to doing the work that you're doing today.
Yeah. So back in 2013, there was a conversation that hit the front page of Reddit. And that discussion was about how quickly technology is advancing and how nobody is talking about it as nobody is understanding the ramifications of that and what it means. And so it's this really cool discussion that brought together a lot of Reddit. It was, I can't remember if it made it towards the exact top or not, but that's where I got into it. And that was before, the Oxford report came out. So really nobody was talking about really just how many jobs are going to be eliminated by automation, what kind of really amazing things was already existing and coming down the pike. So one of them that really caught my mind was that there were already self-driving trucks in the mines of Rio Tinto. So they already had these gigantic robotic trucks, and they wanted to automate their whole fleet by 2020. So it's I was just thinking, here I am. I thought that I was following technology pretty well. I've always been into technology. And I knew that we had just developed self-driving car technology, the Google X contest had just been, recently won. And then a few years later, they were already commercializing this stuff. And we weren't talking about where we were going. So that really got me thinking about this stuff. And that led me, I read Manna by Marshall Brain, which was a really interesting science fiction novella that kind of took it like a dystopia, utopia kind of look at the future, where because of technology, we could go down this route, which is pretty much the route that we're going, as far as we're going to automate people out of jobs, and then, well, what are we going to do with them? We can put them in giant dorms and feed them and just kind of keep them from committing crimes, but that's that. And it's really very dystopian kind of look. And then the other half of the book was about actually leveraging technology to look at this as a good thing. Let's automate as much stuff as we can, let's expand, let's use the resources as smartly as we can. And that was more of a resource-based economy kind of situation. And just that the idea of utilizing technology to either, so that we're all worse off or that we're all better off, that really appealed to me. And that got me thinking, so what, how do we do that? How do we get to this science fiction-y Star Trek utopian future instead of this dystopian Mad Max kind of horrendous nightmare of a future? And that's when I happened upon basic income. And I started looking into it and studying, I didn't realize that we were so close to something very similar to it in the 70s. I didn't realize that we had done experiments all over the US and even Canada in the 70s. And I didn't know the more recent stuff that was happening across the world. And the more I looked into it, I was just well, this is like that lever. If you're thinking of a lever that can move the world on a fulcrum, it's this is that one thing that can really actually move the needle and budge things in a big way. It's not going to solve everything, but it can solve a lot of things to some degree in such a way that why would we not do this one thing that can be so powerful for all of humanity? So once I kind of realized, reached that kind of conclusion, It's like, well, I can't spend my time doing anything else because this idea is just too important for like all of humanity. So that's what I started focusing on.
So yeah, tell everybody how you set up what you do now. Like I see you now as a self UBI funded UBI lobbyist of doom. Is that accurate?
Yes, yeah. So I faced the same challenges that everyone faced, where you realize there's something that you really want to do, and yet you're prevented from doing it because you have to do other things in order to survive. So in my case, I kind of, it was just like an aha moment where I figured, wait a second, like it was right after Patreon was launched, and I thought, okay, so this is the platform that I could actually potentially use to crowdfund a perpetual basic income that enables me to focus fully on basic income full time. And by doing that, not only would I free myself to actually focus on what I wanted to focus on and do that, but it would also lend me authority in being able to talk about this by saying like, yeah, I'm actually living it. I know what it's like, and I could learn more about having it is like, instead of just like reading, academic stuff and articles and these kind of things. Like, what does it really feel like? What's it like having? And sure enough, like I did learn more about it by having it, and it's changing the way that I think about things in a way that you don't really read, you don't really consider like an academic kind of stuff. I guess so. One example, just to give you an idea of that, is that because I've essentially decoupled, my work from my income, and like that's arguable. Like people would say, oh, well, you basically have a job doing this, so that you're forced essentially to do this in order to keep this going. But it's like, if you look at it that way, that's one way to look at it. But another way is that money comes first. It's not coming afterwards. It comes first. And then I'm able to focus on what I want to focus on, and I'm doing what I love. And so I'm not earning money for that. It's money is enabling me to do that. And so when money comes first, then you are able to focus on these things, and you're able to make decisions that you couldn't otherwise make. Like you're able to say, okay, do I want to sell an article, or do I want to produce it and release it into like the public domain? Like, is it important to me that I like lock this stuff up behind a paywall in order to create artificial scarcity in order to get money off of it? Or is it more important that the information itself gets into people's brains and they're able to think about that? And so that I would rather, something be read by 10 million people than get paid, $1,000 for 1,000 people to read it,
Yep.
So it's made me think differently, even about intellectual property and, just the idea of selling stuff, instead of producing it and putting it out there for free. Like it's very freeing to be able to do stuff for free and still be able to pay the bills. And I think that
Right.
a lot of I think there'll be a shift even in society of a lot more people doing that they're able to say, wait a second, I don't have to sell stuff anymore, so maybe I don't want to. Like how much more, imagine like the difference in art that can be done when someone is creating something and it's basically a gift to the world, saying like, I've created this and I feel passionate about it and I think it's beautiful and I think it's art, I think this is art. And I don't worry about selling it to someone. I didn't create it because someone I thought might want to buy it because they would like it. It's more like intrinsically motivated artistic kind of creation.
Right.
And that's kind of powerful to think about as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's I like the fact that you frame it as almost an intrinsic emotional shift. We talked, in our sort of initial chat about the freedom dividend. We talk about, ending the stigma, and we talk about, the welfare cliff. We talk about all these sort of economic realities. But I really do. I think a lot about the how much difference there would be in people's lives when they can wake up in the morning and choose, pick, right? Going back to freedom, right? Like we're all supposed to be freedom cheerleaders, right? Like just being free, because as a musician, I definitely resonate a lot with everything that you were just saying. Sort of my job for the last 20 years or whatever, like the idea that you could just do that is intense. Like it can change your entire perspective on the whole thing.
Even if you had a UBI though, Corey, if I wanted you to play at a private party of mine, presumably I'd have to make it worth your while.
I'm expensive.
But I have to say, I mean, Scott's right. The upper classes had the freedom to do things to contribute to society in ways that weren't necessarily motivated by making money. That's been true since the beginning of civilization. And a lot of the greatest achievements, intellectual and artistic achievements that have been made were actually made by people who were not employed to do it, but they were motivated by passion and desire and had fortunately the means to do it because they didn't have to slave away for a living. So I mean, if we can move toward a future where more people have that luxury, or even make it so that it's not a luxury anymore, I actually think we would have more productivity, not less.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, capitalism won't go away either. Like I still have to pay you for a private concert.
right.
But you wouldn't have to.
Yeah, but you might have to pay more.
You'll do it for me, but like if I weren't your buddy.
Well, and this is the thing, like I put out metric tons of content all day, every day, and the first thought was not that I had to get paid for it, right? Like that I'm doing it because I have to do it. I feel compelled to do it, and we're both in a position where we can make this podcast. If it never makes any money, we're still going to do it, right? Like that, I think is kind of epic.
Let's just get Yang elected. I'll count that as payment.
Oh yeah.
Yes. Yeah, no, it's a big investment.
Right. Yeah.
Very big ROI.
Yeah, exactly. The ROI is intense. So, Scott, when was the first time that you heard about Andrew Yang and his candidacy? And did he explicitly read your email before coming up with the Freedom Dividend?
No. So Andrew and I met for the first time back in, I think it was 2015, I believe. And it was through the Economic Security Project, where they were just starting up, and we're starting up like the first gatherings of people. And I met him a few times since, and so I already knew him, and we were already friends. And he even talked to me about this before he started his campaign. He came into New Orleans and we sat down, and it's like, hey, I'm thinking about, what do you think that I could do that would have the most impact? And do you think running for president's a good idea? I was like, yeah, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
If you're willing to do that, then absolutely, yes, that would be amazing.
Oh, and that is a sacrifice too, because boy, I mean,
yeah.
No, my wife actually told me if I ever ran for office, she would divorce me. I mean, it's really hard.
Right, she drew that
under
line.
The public eye like that is it's not fun.
Yeah.
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 So it's very excited from the beginning.
Yeah, that's intense. And, we've talked about this a little bit before as well. Like even if Yang doesn't win the primary, because I think he would come to straight clean up in the general. This podcast got started. Conservative friends that I've been telling about UBI for frickin' 3 years, suddenly they listened to the frickin' Rogan the Rogan episode, and they're coming back and like, oh no, dude, the Freedom Dividend makes total sense. I'm like, what the? It was crazy.
Right.
So it's really I think there's been an order of magnitude or more shift already. And it's building off all the work that you've done and laying the groundwork. Like watching you work on Twitter is awesome, man. I mean, it's you've obviously been building up to this for a while as well. So I guess I want to take it in a couple different directions, but as the Moving Forward podcast, what do you think? Do you have any advice for us on how we can move forward and really move this idea forward?
You mean as a podcast, or you mean as a media strategy, or what kind of guests and topics to cover?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. It seems it's kind of open, kind of open ended, right? Anything that and again, there might not necessarily be an easy answer to this question, and we can come back to it. But yeah, if you have any advice for us at all on how we might be able to move the needle as a media project.
Yeah. So first of all, I think just your idea itself of focusing on not left, not right, by having both sides, and I think is a great start. I've been pushing that from the beginning, and I saw this from the beginning too, where just one of the first things I did was become the moderator of the basic income subreddit, and being able to like see like arguments on both sides. Like you'd have like socialists putting like socialist stuff up, and capitalists putting capitalist stuff up, and even like the vice versa. Having like anti-UBI pieces from the socialists and anti-UBI pieces from the capitalists, and it was really neat seeing this environment be created where people were talking that you weren't previously talking, and then I can see that this was already opening up to other discussions, like at a larger scale too, or more personal scale. I thought this was really neat, where I saw like Andy Stern and Charles Murray kind of team up, and they did multiple events together, and through that, I mean, this is a union leader and like a extreme conservative guy who was like very hated on the left. And, you could say the same thing about Andy Stern, just being this, giant union leader on the left, being like very disliked on the right for being a union leader. But yet they like formed a friendship, and they were able to discuss other things,
Right.
And I think that there's something very valuable about that, where like it's kind of an unspoken or underappreciated kind of effect of the basic income discussion itself being not left, not right, is that you can actually start talking about other things, things that were not previously possible because you're both in your own filter bubbles, and you're just like, your ears are plugged and you're humming like la 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 la, I don't hear you. And I did some research into this too when I first got into this, seeing that like there are like psychological like studies of saying, all right, well, how do you get people who disagree with each other to start like talking? And part of it, like there's a strategy where it says, okay, one of the things you can do is just personalize your discussion and just talk about personal things, like what's your favorite food, what kind of TV do you like, it's like, oh, my favorite food is tacos, like, oh, I love tacos too. And then suddenly it's like there's a bond there because you both like tacos. And then you can start thinking of the other person as a human being just like you are, instead of like the other tribal side, the other team.
Andrew Yang was Corey and Mai's taco.
That you literally stole it. The next words out of my face were hashtag Andrew Yang is our taco.
Yeah. So my advice, I guess, I would love to see more expanding out from the basic income discussion even, and just you can touch upon this because basic income touches on so many things.
Yep.
But because of that, you can also talk about other things as well. And that I think would be really fascinating to see, both sides talking about, other things as well. Whereas, and you can even say, oh, well, I would have never discussed this before. And,
right.
Now they can. So that would be really neat.
That actually happened to us, huh, Corey? Because actually it's happened to us multiple times, but I was talking about, the benefits of states' rights and people voting with their feet. And Corey said, well, that's easy for you to say because you can afford to move. And then he thought about it and he's like, oh my God, with UBI, that would actually work, wouldn't it?
Right. Like honestly, with the UBI creating the kind of floor that it would have the capacity to create, suddenly conservative arguments would actually make sense for, most humans. As opposed to being something that's kind of disconnected from the people that need it most, right? The people where income inequality is causing huge problems. But that's like, so the whole first series, obviously we're talking about the freedom dividend right now. What we're really doing is we're going to go through every single one of Yang's policy proposals as to really expand that thing. And I'm sure we've talked about the freedom dividend every time because that the combination of the freedom dividend plus any other policy usually means that policy is going to do better, right? Like just as a general idea. So I'm excited to hear you say that. That's sort of the
freedom dividend power up effect.
Yeah, that's really it's like adding spice to anything. Or like
and so there's something really interesting there too, like you said, as far as and I would apply that to both sides, where there's a lot of conservative beliefs that are held pretty closely, but there's a lot of magical thinking involved too, where it says like the theory and philosophy can be solid, But like, as far as like it being accurate according to like on the ground conditions and stuff, it's just not. And, same thing could be said on the left. Like when you say, the left will say, well, we got to make sure that college is available to everybody. Like the school is that we got to make sure universal education is available. And that's like our main focus. And the same thing with healthcare. Like, you got to make sure that healthcare is the focus. And it's like, well, okay, so if you're focusing on that as being primary, then and income is such a large portion of both of those things. I've like one stat I found was that it was estimated that 60% of like health outcomes are related to your income.
Yep.
And so it's such a huge component. And same thing with education, where you can get like all the free school that you want, and you can just do terrible at it because you're starving, you're thinking about food during the day, and your home environment is abusive and terrible, and because they're stressed out over money, and you just can't focus on your school, you can't do that. So then, great, you have all this free stuff, free education, but it doesn't work because you can't focus. Same thing with healthcare. It's great, all this free, say cancer treatment and heart attack treatment, and all these treatments after the fact instead of avoiding all this stuff upstream. So it's unrealistic to focus on these things and just say, well, let's fix these problems by just throwing money at education and healthcare, instead of saying, no, these problems exist much farther upstream. That's where they needs to be fixed. That's where it makes sense. Yeah. So it's like that. This is an issue on both sides, where both the left and the right are like not really focusing on like the bottom, like foundational kind of stuff, and they're just hoping to fix these things otherwise. And not the things are bad, it's just you're missing out on like the core like stuff.
Yeah, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Yeah, and as Yang likes to point out, not everybody necessarily wants to go to a 4-year university. Some people might prefer to, learn how to, be a plumber. And in fact, jobs like plumbers might be more secure than jobs like lawyers, as it turns out. So,
yep. 100%.
There is no fix-all solution. But the closest thing to it would be just giving people more money, because people have different priorities. And the wonderful thing about money is whatever your priorities are, it increases your odds of being able to achieve it.
Yeah. There's this great Give Directly graphic they put together, where I can't remember just the number of people like from the recipients of the Give Directly, the UBI experiment going on in Kenya right now, where they broke up the distribution of like what people were using the money on. And it looks like a fingerprint kind of thing to me, because like every single person is different, and they're all using the amount of money for various amounts of different things. There's so much, it's completely unique. Like every single person is different from the next person. And like something like that just speaks so clearly, I feel, as that everyone is best at making their own decisions. And as soon as you're centralizing this and saying that, the government is right, well, this amount should go to food, and this amount should go to healthcare, and this amount should go to clothing, and this kind of thing, it's always going to be inaccurate. It's always going to be just not effective for everybody, because it's no one person agrees on what their needs are to the same degree as everyone else. Everyone's different.
My wife always likes to point out, apparently she reads a lot, and she always has these amazing anecdotes. One thing she likes to point out is that originally airplanes were designed for, quote, the average person, until they realized that what they determined as the average was basically like the median or whatever, right, of everything. So like the median arm length, the median leg length, etc. What they realized is that there isn't a single person in the world who is the average person. That person doesn't exist. It's a construct. That the average person is an individual.
Yeah, no, except in Idiocracy, where the main character was the most average person that they could find in everything.
Oh, Idiocracy. It hits far too close to home these days. Yeah, I guess like thinking in terms of, and seriously, thank you for the advice from before. I'm still kind of mulling all that stuff over, and it's kind of validating, how we're doing this and how we're thinking about it, which is fantastic. What would you say are the biggest challenges? Like I know you field questions about this stuff all day, every day, right? Like what is like the one or two criticisms of UBI or the freedom dividend that kind of stick the most, that are the most challenging to kind of overcome, or just the most or the ones that are the most popular that we're just going to have the easiest time smacking down?
Okay, so I would say, compare like Yang's freedom dividend kind of plan, and including others as well that tie into this, like carbon dividends as part of it, the financial transaction tax as part of it, and people can read my own plan that I published previously back in like 2015, and you'll see that it's very similar. So he got a lot of stuff, a lot of same thinking there, and so I really agree, with a lot of the way that he's doing it. But of course, there are things that I think that he still could improve upon. And I still hope that he does make those improvements. And even if he doesn't, I would push for those improvements, like in an actual bill, or separately. So like my main thing is saying like a child allowance. If we want to scale per household, and most economists agree with this, that you need to have that child component. And most of the tests that have been done, like for UBI in India and Namibia and even in the experiments that we did here in the U.S. and Canada, like all of this scaled by household size. So that's an important component that I think that he doesn't need to call it. He doesn't need to expand the basic income and say like it's basic income for kids by providing $333 per month. But he could just add it as like policy number 115 or whatever, saying I support a child allowance. It could be $300, $350 or whatever. But the Brown proposal is something that Democrats are rallying behind. The Brown Sherrod plan, which was it's almost a fully universal child allowance, and that's building support, and it's been like co-sponsored by Bernie and I think Kamala Harris may have co-sponsored it too, and Elizabeth Warren, and so it's a popularly Democratic policy, and it could be sold to conservatives as being it totally could be mostly revenue neutral. Again, it's saying that we're not talking about building this on top of it. We're saying that instead of an EITC that scales by household, instead of food stamps that scale by household, instead of WIC, for there's a lot of these things that are essentially child programs, and this also includes tax credits, not only the EITC and the CTC, but also just your child deduction, that you get a dependent deduction on your taxes for a child. So we need to reform all of that together and just say, all right, let's neutralize that out. And if we just give a flat amount to everyone in cash, then that would just be far better than having all this whole slew of programs require all this bureaucracy, and everything. It's the same thinking behind the basic income. And that would be a huge improvement and would reduce poverty and inequality even further than Yang's existing plan. And so that's one thing that I think is important, especially because on the other side of this, the things that the detractors will focus on is saying that, well, if you're looking at, say, single parents with 2 kids or something, and for the most part, they're going to need to not choose the dividend. They're going to need to continue on with their existing welfare programs. And so the thinking there is that, well, they're no worse off, but they're not benefiting from this lack of conditions. They're still having to go through all these hoops.
The means testing stuff.
Yeah. And that's really, we need to unconditionalize all this stuff at the bottom to create a full floor. And so I like the way that Yang's, it's smart to give an either or, so that it gives people the choice, of saying that I want to keep going, what I'm doing, and that's their choice. But how much of a choice is it really if they're choosing to go down, if they would be going from $2,000 to $1,000 or something like that,
right?
For kids. And again, that's the thing. And you even saw part of this too as an effect in like the Finland experiment, where they designed the experiment And the experimenters who designed it wanted to include a child component, and the politicians didn't want to do that, so they didn't include that. And then it kind of, like, I wouldn't say it ruined the experiment, but it drastically changed the experiment so that a significant portion of the population needed to continue going through this, conditional benefit system, which meant that the test itself was really more about a test of reducing the amount of conditions from 100% to 80. It was 82 or 83 or 84%, something like that. So you slightly reduce the conditions, and therefore you slightly saw effects from that. And so if we really want to receive the full impact of an unconditional basic income, then it needs to be across everybody, and that includes kids. And then you also wouldn't have these negative effects that you could potentially see, and also have to design around where you have to say, okay, well, we don't want we don't want a single parent getting $1,500 a month to be impacted by the 10% VAT because their taxes are going to go up essentially through consumption, but it's not going to be compensated for by the basic income because they're not getting it. So they're going to be taking a hit. And then, of course, you can either say, all right, we'll have to boost those benefits slightly to neutralize that effect, or we're going to have to essentially reduce what the VAT is taxing, which would reduce the revenue from the VAT and add further complications to that. So it's you got to compensate for that in some way, and it just makes far more sense to just go in the same logic, and let's reform the way we do child benefits as well and provide that allowance. So that's what I think is an important improvement that I still think I hope that he gets that he hopes that he picks up. But that's also without that, it's one of the better arguments for people to have, and it's not a good argument in general. It's still better than your other plans. If you're comparing this to Bernie Sanders and Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren and all these others, Yang's plan will still reduce poverty, and it will reach those 13 million people that are not part of the existing safety net, that are completely falling through the holes. They're in poverty. They're getting nothing. Only Yang sees them. And so that's the part that a lot of the detractors ignore, because usually you're on the left and you don't want to admit that the programs that are conditional do have all these holes and have all these failures.
Wow. Okay, that's really interesting. I feel like I want to ask you a question and weigh in there for a second as the conservative on the show. Actually, one thing I like about it is that it isn't based on how many children people have. I'm sure this doesn't surprise you, Scott, but a lot of conservatives don't like that because they feel like it basically encourages irresponsible behavior. So my wife and I, as very comfortable upper middle class people, have chosen not to have a kid because we feel like we can't afford to properly educate and clothe them and ensure that they're going to have a trust that makes sure they're okay, even if all the jobs get automated away or whatever, right? So why when some responsible middle class people are choosing not to have kids, is it really good, especially when jobs are going to be going away, to encourage people to grow the population irresponsibly?
Sure. So you can look at it that way. But also then if you look at the evidence from child allowances are very common across the world. And over and over again, you just don't see much of an impact at all on fertility rates. And
okay,
in
that's
fact,
interesting.
You can see these in the other direction. So there are some results showing that this does decrease. And if you look at child fertility rates by income, it's a really interesting curve. It's like a U. So at the very bottom, your fertility rates are higher because of, say, low income. And then as you gain income, then you have fewer kids. And then when you have a lot of income, then suddenly you're able to have more kids. So it's that U effect. And if you compare that to the distributional impact of a freedom dividend paid for the 10% VAT, so that you're the most of the net increases at the bottom, and then you've got a net decrease at the top, then you're going to slightly flatten that U theoretically, so that you are going to, I would expect a slightly lower impact overall on fertility rates potentially, but it would be a very small impact.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just going to say, you actually convinced me there. I mean, one thing we do on the show is we don't argue about facts. That's a waste of time. But, you know, just from a philosophical perspective, wouldn't it be better than to just have a higher UBI for everybody and still not tie it to children? Because, I mean, it seems like, I mean, yeah, the higher their income is, the fewer kids they're going to have up to a point, as you said. I think that's absolutely true. And I'm not, by the way, I'm not anti-children. I think people should have children. I just think, like, why not just have a higher UBI instead?
Okay, so a couple of things too I want to bring up. So the Alaska dividend is a great example of it's fully universal. Everyone gets it, and every kid gets it, and every kid gets the same amount even. So if you look at a household of 5 people, it's not just the parents getting, say, $2,000 each. You know, the kids get it too. And that's part of the reason, I think, why it's been so popular. I think if they have designed it from the beginning and said, all right, well, let's not make this universal, and instead let's only give it to adults, then we can figure out, you know, the adults will be a higher amount, and, you know, but then if you do that, you're going to have essentially a regressive impact on families, where it's going to be benefiting, you know, single, you know, childless adults more than families. And so I think that even like most of our programs in the U.S., it's all designed around households and families. Like it's not a popular plan to say, all right, I'm going to pass a policy that holds singles up higher than families.
Well, so I can see how that would be persuasive on the you might get some kickback on the right.
Well, but it's so funny too, because there's a lot of you know, there's on the right, there's some really confusing stuff I see where, you know, it's like it's for family and not for family, where it's like, you know, what is it recently that the so-and-so was in like the Congress, and he made like that ridiculous presentation about like the Green New Deal that even included like a tauntaun. I don't know if you remember that one.
Yep.
And he ended it by saying like the real solution is to have kids. You know, it's like families, and you know, that was a very conservative viewpoint to saying we need more kids. And even Paul Ryan said that too, where like he said, I'm doing my part. Like I had kids, and it's like you push this family unit thing, and also like you push you're pushing you know, that abortion is bad. So abortion is bad. And if abortion is bad, of course, then you're saying you don't want as many kids, and because you would want them to have kids, you know, you want to give them that choice. And again, that's something you see tied to income as well, where you see that if you really wanted to reduce abortions, then you would make sure that parenting was an actual choice. You know, that means people could afford to have those kids. So on the one hand, you're saying that you know, we don't want more kids, but on the other hand, you're saying we don't want abortions. But if you were actually made parenting affordable, then you would drastically reduce abortions. And
yeah, I mean, a lot of conservatives, including me, are pro-choice. Yeah, I mean, on the grounds that actually poverty and crime are lower when abortion is legal. So, but yeah, no, I mean, that you're right. The same thing happens on the left. I mean, but the Republicans and Democrats are made up of these coalitions that are not like natural allies all the time.
It's not always consistent. Let me ask you this. Direct this at Rio. Let's say, just like, because we know that there's going to be a whole lot of benefits for you as a single couple, right? To having kids that are better off, better educated, happier, yada yada yada, right? Like we talk about the civilization part of it. We talk about the stigma that going around. You know, the fact that, you know, we want to lift the floor for literally everyone, right? Just as an argument, if I were to increase the VAT by 1% and also give every single kid $333, would you say yes to that?
Well, I mean, I'll put it this way. I would not stop supporting Ying's policy just because he added that detail.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, and so again, too, this is very much a revenue neutral thing. Like we really do have, if you were to just totally revenue neutralize it and just give a cash amount without
stop means testing
any taxes, and, you know, just convert all these programs that we're using and do tax reform so that you're not doing a child deduction and you're just giving cash, then the amount I think would be around like $150, $200 something per month.
Yeah, and in terms of simplifying the bureaucracy, that is very appealing to conservatives. Actually, that's a good thing. Yeah.
You just the fact that it's revenue neutral, and we're going to this point where, you know, Well, and again, it could be revenue neutral, but the second that it becomes part of a freedom dividend, as an example, we talk about this all the time. Once, if automation goes down the road that, Scott, you and I think that it will inevitably go, where we're automating things way faster than we could give human beings, subsistence jobs, doing whatever, right? Like that's going to be a serious problem. You can then tie the VAT tax or an increase of the VAT tax or whatever we need to do to adding more money to the freedom dividend, right? Which means that we've taken the child situation away from that, away from sort of even the stigma of all that, the means testing, the bureaucracy, as Rio brings up rightly, and then it can actually scale with this thing. And again, I always think about it exactly. I love the fact that you brought up the Star Trek thing. To me, this is the lever that gets us on the path that leads us towards that level of hyperabundance that is possible, right?
Yeah. And so, all of this is about trying to figure out what's the best way, what's the most effective thing we can do, like in the moment, right now, economically and politically, and then how do we get to this much better future? What kind of things we need to build into the system? What do we have to continue fighting for after we get some kind of basic income set up? I think the biggest thing is I want to try to make sure that people see, and I think it helps too, seeing it as a freedom dividend and like seeing it as a tech check. And if we see that productivity continues to rise, then of course the freedom dividend should rise with productivity. So I can see this as, and this is tricky too, because again, Yang he's right about wanting to measure things differently than just GDP, and so we'll have to look at a more cohesive, expansive picture as to what is productivity really, what is all of this that we're creating together. And therefore, when I say that I would like to tie the freedom dividend, to GDP per capita, so that as GDP per capita rises, then the freedom dividend rises. Then part of this too is figuring out, well, is GDP the proper measurement, to figure out individual productivity in society? And so, what do we couple the freedom dividend to in order to properly increase, with our collective ability to generate more wealth and productivity, and just do more with less in general.
Yeah. Well, and on the topic of being pro-family, something else conservatives like about this is that it makes it possible to have more households with only one working parent. You can have stay-at-home parents if they have an extra $2,000 a month. Maybe both of them don't have to work in order to maintain a middle-class lifestyle, and that's definitely good for kids.
Yeah, and also I think another component of this as well is the ability to purchase time. So if you can create the situation where essentially you can look at two parents, so within the household, then say both parents could work 3 or 4 days per week instead, and therefore they're each watching their own kid, and so the kid is still being raised by the parents, but each just working less in order to do that. Well, then also you're looking at better productivity, because we see that as people work less, they're able to do more with those fewer hours. And of course, it's great that kids will be raised by their actual parents instead of just someone getting paid for it that may or may not give a shit
instead of Uncle Sam paying for their nanny. Yeah.
It's so weird that we say that it's like work if someone else is paid to watch your kid, but it's not work if you don't. I mean, obviously you're providing a benefit to your family and also society itself. And I've argued about this in one of my pieces as well, saying that effectively this is a Pigovian subsidy. And so if you look at Pigovian taxes and Pigovian subsidies, it's this idea that there are market failures where, as far as a Pigovian tax goes, the market is not calculating the full cost of this through the externalities. And so you have to artificially add this cost to it in order to correctly price those externalities into the cost. And a Pigovian subsidy was looking at the opposite, saying that there are things that you benefit from that you're not paying for. And so we should actually encourage those things and recognize them. And so vaccines would be an example where because of the herd effect, you are receiving this benefit without paying for it. So we should encourage that. And so when you look at, say, people raising their own kids, and in loving environments where they really are caring about that and raising better kids, that's a benefit to everybody. And it's also lowering the price of, say, childcare itself, because there's less of a demand for paid workers doing that. So instead of paying essentially, the current cost is, let's say, $4,000 per, let's say $2,000 per month on childcare for a family. Well, imagine if there were fewer workers available to do that, and because there was a higher demand for that, because everyone was getting paid to watch each other's kids, then there would be that, if there were few workers available, it would cost $4,000 or $5,000 or something. So essentially, everyone paying for childcare is paying less than they would otherwise, because some people are watching their own kids for free. And I think that's important to bring into this, because you're saying that, not only is this valuable work that people are doing and it's not being recognized, but it's like people are benefiting from that. They're not paying for it. And that should be something where you should be more okay with paying increased taxes to actually make that possible, because then even more people could do that same thing and even bring the prices down further, and you would benefit further in so many ways. And so it's really interesting to look at this from a Bogovian subsidy angle as well.
All right. Yep. Yeah. We're talking about having kids. Just the only thing that really, well, not the only thing. There was a few, but my brother and his wife are, they just moved down here from Canada. They're really feeling the sting of not having universal healthcare. That's a whole other conversation. Yeah. But they're both working. My brother's working 60 hours a week. His wife was working 40 plus hours a week. She spends 35 of her hours taking care of the kids' childcare. It's like, talk about being penalized to go to work, right? There, it is just north of being pointless for her to have a job. Which is really, really insane to me. And again, the freedom dividend for them, it'd be really, my wife and I talk about, we were out kayaking one day, and if the freedom dividend happened, we're like, we could probably just screw off and get a camper and do whatever the hell we wanted. Right. But the amount of stress that it would relieve for my brother's family is literally incalculable. He is stressed out 24 hours a day, every single day, all the time. He's got two kids that are 5 and 4, and one 13-year-old that apparently is turning into some form of demon, which is really fun. But even never mind even the child benefit thing, which I think there's really valid arguments for that. And again, if it was revenue neutral just by getting rid of all of the stigmatized means tested stuff. I can't imagine that wouldn't be a really amazing ad, and it would be a perfect sort of addition, right? We get the freedom dividend passed. That sort of freedom dividend 1A is where we could add some stuff like that. But just it would change their lives.
And it's also, again, it's very controlling. I mean, this stuff is it's limiting of choice, and it's like, if you look at WIC, if you notice these stickers throughout the store, they're like a grocery store, and you'll say WIC approved and stuff on these. So it's like you can buy that item, but you can't buy all these other items, including diapers and these kind of things. That's a major one. You don't get any diaper assistance, so you need cash. But then you look at programs like TANF and stuff that's built for families, and that program is just a mess as far as how much revenue is actually going towards cash benefits and how those benefits are done, and there's money going to states to essentially lower their taxes on wealthier people. It's paying for the kids of people earning 6 figures so that they can go to college. And this stuff is meant for people in poverty, and their states are finding all sorts of ways to get around that. And all these programs are just so limiting and so ridiculously paternalistic, and they're damaging. The effects of these conditions are damaging to people. You've seen it. This is a study of the state programs. If you look at states where they have the most conditions versus the states with the fewest conditions and strings, it's also interesting to see that the ones with the most conditions have more African Americans, and ones with the fewest conditions have more white people. So it's there's racism within the system, even though illegal to actually do that. It's like you get around that by having these states. So it's just, we want to get rid of as many of these conditions as possible. And just another point I wanted to bring up too, as far as like the ability for people to watch their own kids. There's another step there between parents watching their own kids and like paying for their own kids, and it's like a wheel setup. When I say wheel setup, there's the ability for, say, 5 people to get together and each one agree that they'll take, 1 day of the 5-day week. So they'll watch everyone's kids. So one person will watch 5 kids on Monday, and the next parent will watch all 5 kids on Tuesday. So you go in the circle where each one is watching everyone. And that can be a totally unpaid thing, again, as well, because everyone's benefiting from it.
Right.
And so this is an observed effect from basic income experiments, where you see this wheel kind of take over. One of the popular ones that we've seen multiple times is where people will pool their basic incomes together so that you can create a wheel of large capital grants. So you say, all right, I'm not going to take my $1,000 this month, and I'll wait, it's for 6 months from now, and then I'll get, $6,000 instead of $1,000. So by going around this circle. And that's a really interesting, totally self-motivated, if you're a capitalist, you can look at this and go, well, there you go. These are people making their own decisions.
Right. Now they actually have capital.
Yeah. Yeah. So they're figuring out ways of creating capital so that they can use that. And then on the other side, if you're looking from the left and you're like, well, we want more like worker co-ops and stuff and more democracy in the workplace and these things. And you've got people democratically making these decisions together that they would prevented from doing otherwise. So it's really interesting to see that there's these examples of people immediately getting together in ways that they wouldn't have done otherwise with basic income.
Yeah, I think Rio's computer must have just died or something like that. But I think he just messaged me. But yeah, I mean, like he would respond a lot to that just from our previous conversations. Like the ability to, he thinks a lot about, and I love talking to conservatives that feel this way. Like, having experienced what it feels like to be sort of part of the investment class, and I am becoming that. He has been for a long time. But like you get a sense of what that's like, right? Like to the point where you were talking about initially about the different, emotional context or human context of being able to wake up in the morning and decide what to do instead of it being decided for you because you don't want to starve to death. It's like an epic shift. Like it's an unbelievably big deal. So then to have groups of people have that same capital, I think about that all the time, and I really wish more people would imagine what that's going to be like. I think Yang has talked about, airdropping $60 million into a town that just lost its one factory, as an example, right? Giving everybody $1,000 a month, and it saves towns, like saves them. Period. End of discussion. Like it literally means that the property values aren't going to necessarily tank. The coffee shop isn't going to close. The barber still has a job. It has such a profound effect on the entire economy that it's completely ridiculous.
Yeah, so one of the things that I really have loved about conservatives getting into this discussion, thanks to like the Joe Rogan appearance and starting to support Yang, is that there's so much more understanding of just what a big deal basic income would have on rural areas, like small town USA. Mm-hmm. And, I've talked about this for years, but like it's so great to have people really thinking like, oh my gosh, how big would that be for mom and pop stores across the country to be able to actually survive now instead of being put under by Amazon and the Walmarts and stuff, and
right.
People be able to make that choice, and instead of these economies drying up, for people to actually, for these stores to function and people to be able to go to those stores, people being able to start their own stores. And it's the entrepreneurship effect is a huge impact of basic income that I think is especially big at the small town rural area kind of focus.
Yeah, I'm in Pasco County. Oh, there he is. I'm in Pasco County, Florida. One of the biggest sort of embarrassing issues here is just the epic level of homelessness, right? So we talk about it a lot. The Republicans that run this county don't want to talk about that at all because their developing donors don't care. It's not in their purview to care. And so we keep trying to like eke out, little benefits or whatever. We're trying to fix the entire society by lifting these people out of abject poverty, right? Their solution is to just literally to bust them into other counties because that'll fix it. I just, thinking about how much of an effect this would have on a family like my brother's is really, really epic. But it would just absolutely destroy homelessness, full stop, right? Like the idea that you're going to, without any means test whatsoever, airdrop $1,000 a month into people that are living out of a freaking tent. Is it necessarily going to get them a home or do the whatever? Like it isn't necessarily going to do any of that stuff. But suddenly they aren't desperate of starving to death tomorrow, right? It's huge.
Yeah. So if you look at, the typical ways of going about housing assistance, like HUD did a study on this a few years ago. It's a very big study, and it didn't really get that much attention, but I thought it was a pretty big deal. And so they compared your Section 8 housing vouchers versus like, actual housing compared to like temporary shelters and these things, and found that if you wanted to find like the best impact on like long term getting people off the streets, housing vouchers were the way to go. They're most efficient, most effective means, and housing vouchers themselves are very limited. So there's a lot of details in the existing system that people don't really realize. So I want to emphasize that Section 8 housing vouchers are not just like the equivalent of cash that you can use for housing. Only people who accept them will accept them. So there's particular neighborhoods and particular areas in cities that you can use these vouchers at. And not only that, but there's like huge waiting lists for these vouchers as well. So like not everybody who qualifies for them getting them. In fact, if you look at across the U.S., if you look at those in poverty who should qualify for housing assistance, only a quarter of those people are getting it. So 3/4 of people in poverty who qualify for housing assistance get nothing.
Yeah.
And so that's like this. It's a very clear example of just how many holes are in our existing system and how many people are falling through it. And of course, even those who are caught in this like net that we have, those 1 in every 4 people, then they're being told, okay, so you can live here or here, and that's it. Like you cannot use that as cash that they could use anywhere. So if you look even at the people getting assistance right now, and you're just cashing that out and making sure that they get cash instead of these vouchers, then suddenly they can live anywhere, and no one can stop them from doing that. It's just like cash. There's no longer any limits. And so we're not only decreasing homelessness with basic income in a way that would just be dramatic.
Yep.
We're also increasing even those who are getting assistance, their ability to live where they want to live, and instead of being limited to places that they have to live right now and are in conditions that they have to live. So it's important, I think, on both sides to see that it's something that the left doesn't look at this enough, and they're so concerned about the loss of benefits and saying that Yang wants to destroy the safety net and and it's like, well, there needs to be more understanding of what the safety net is, what the ramifications and effects are of that safety net, and just how much this would improve that, even if you're not improving the monetary value. Even if someone's getting $1,000 in housing assistance right now, and then suddenly they can start getting $1,000 of cash,
they would.
A very big difference for them.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and again, it's opt-in, right? So if they don't want to do it, they don't need to do it. But here's the thing, we would see them do it. It's like the public option in healthcare. There's a reason why people are going to flood to it, and not because it's worse, right? Like I think that is a really, really good point. Rio, glad you're back.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess the connection here in Garmisch-Partenkirchen, Germany wasn't as good as I thought.
Oh, just say that name one more time. Say that name one more time.
Garmisch-Partenkirchen. Oh, okay, yeah. So I heard the tail end of that thing about housing. That's absolutely, and it's actually much better for capitalism when people can spend money, can choose to live where they want to live. That's better for it frees the market up so that there's actually more competition, which is good as well.
Oh, absolutely. And so if you look at from the market too, so I would say the way that the market works is fundamentally flawed in its inability to determine the difference between a lack of money and a lack of demand. So if you have a lack of money, and so a customer isn't buying something, then the market can't tell if they're not buying it because they don't want it, or they're not buying it because they don't have enough money to buy it. And so if you make sure that every market participant has enough money, it's like some amount of money, then every market will be able to determine that, hey, this is a cleaner signal because we know that they have enough money, and so therefore if they're not buying it, then they don't want it, and that's the only reason. It's not because they don't have enough money. So then if you apply that to housing, then you can see that there's a lot of demand, obviously, for housing, that people want that, but you're not going to cater to a market where you don't know if they're going to be able to afford it. Like, why would you, as a landlord, rent to someone that, who knows if they're going to have a job 2 months from now? It's a lot more. There's a lot more fluctuation of income at the bottom. Things can happen. You can lose your job a lot easier. Why would you provide housing for this? So the market exists right now. Whenever new housing is created, it's more upper market stuff, and that's still a good thing, because by expanding supply and people move into that, then you're free up the rest of the existing supply, and then people can move into that. So it's not bad that they're creating these upper middle kind of market kind of stuff, but it's still distortionary to the market, because there of course is a demand for affordable housing, but you're not meeting that demand. So I think that an effect of basic income, another effect would be that you could effectively create like a Henry Ford kind of person for housing, where for those who are familiar with Henry Ford, he wanted to make the Model T cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. Mm-hmm. His whole goal was that he wanted as many people to be able to afford this as possible. And so he would just organize everything. He was an incredible example of vertical integration he was basically turning dirt into cars at one point, just this ginormous assembly line that just went all the way from resources to cars. And because of that, he was able to make a very affordable car. And if there's someone, I think there's going to be a very smart person out there who suddenly recognizes that everyone has a guaranteed amount of money for housing. Right. And they're going to want to keep as much of that as possible. So if you can figure out a way to house people for, $333 per month, so like a third of their income, and if you make that affordable and nice enough for them people to choose that, you can make bank on that, because it's the same reason Ford did so well. He became a billionaire off the ability to sell cheap cars. So there's a market not being catered to right now.
Yeah, you might have to do that kind of in the middle of nowhere. But the nice thing about the UBI also is if people need to move, either because they're looking for better employment opportunities or because they want to go to less expensive housing, they'll actually have the ability to do that now too.
Yeah.
The thing that struck out at me that I don't think I've ever thought about before, in the idea that as a real estate developer, or as somebody who's providing housing, rentals, whatever, right? You are disincentivized to talk to poor people exactly because it is not stable. You're going to have to factor in a certain amount of time, income, pain and suffering into chasing people that might not have a job or might not, whatever. And suddenly, to your point, everybody's getting $1,000 a month. You're absolutely incentivized to have the best possible thing that you can make for $333 a month. Because they're going to get it, and you want to, and there will then be a massive amount of competition in that space where there is arguably none right now, right?
And it would cease to be the middle of nowhere anymore, because now all these other people would be living there. It would be a little community.
I'm telling you, man. When I was learning how to play guitar, I literally lived in a bus that I bought in the Arctic, right? And I would probably do that again because that was fun. But I was super lucky, right? Like it was a weird conflagration of events, but. when I moved down to Edmonton, started a band, doing that whole stupid hippie thing. Wasn't stupid; it was really fun. But I ended up living in a house with like 8 other people at one point. It was completely ridiculous, and some of the best times of my entire life. So I can absolutely see this thing where you could, and people are already talking about like pod housing and different things that are not a bad thing. Right. Yeah. And it really can be this situation where there would then be a bubbling amount of competition in that space to provide really, really cool things. Because again, you're going to have, to Rio's point, you're going to have the ability then to vote with your feet, to have an effect on what people are producing and how they're producing it, now that they're actually incentivized to do it in a way because they know that the market is actually stable.
Yeah, exactly. And to bring entrepreneurship into this too, as far as like creating the ability to do something that doesn't exist right now. I think a really interesting thing to think about is startups, and how, so much of like startup revenue is just to figure out, well, people need money to live. And so you've got to come up with enough money so that everyone who's part of this startup can actually focus on the startup. And so if everybody's base needs are already covered, then suddenly you don't have to obtain all of that capital that you would otherwise have to obtain. You would still need capital for whatever it is that you're focused on, but you're not focused on covering the what you need in order to pay your employees enough so them to focus on that stuff. And then you could create the situation where suddenly you can give people the choice that doesn't exist right now, saying that, okay, 10 of us get together and we got this great idea, and we're going to work on this together and create this new business or product. And we don't have to worry about profitability like we would otherwise. And so we can really focus on this and making sure that it works. And 2 years from now, if it ends up turning a profit, great. And as part of this saying, all right, whereas before I would have done this for a salary, I would say, well, I want a cut of the shares, percentage after the fact when it starts turning profitable. And so, like, that would be a huge thing where suddenly, instead of earning, $50,000 a year or something, and then not getting a cut, then people are working for free for a couple years, and then bam, they all get like, the equivalent of however many shares, and now they're actually somewhat wealthy now, instead of where before they would have been just doing wage labor. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really interesting thing to think about too, is again, people getting together and having new options that didn't exist before.
Yeah, I completely and totally agree. Okay, so we've already stolen over an hour of your time, and thank you so much for investing that with us. Having your perspective on this stuff is real cool.
But the ROI is going to be huge.
Yeah, right. Exactly, for everybody, for all of humanity, for frick's sake. So what's one thought that you would like to leave our audience with moving forward?
Sure. So I think the most important thought is also kind of a way of defining basic income, because basic income is, when you get right down to it, it's not money. It's what it will enable you to do. So my question for everybody is to think, what is it that you're not doing right now because you aren't starting each month with an unconditional basic income? If you can think about that one thing or multiple things that you're not doing right now that you really want to be doing, then really that's what basic income is. And that's why you should really start to push for it like the rest of us.
I like it. Sounds good. Rio, do you want to add anything before we close out?
No, I guess I would just say that our little disagreement about the children's allowance, as you called it. Yeah, well, okay. So in the spirit of compromise, I would be willing to go along with that rather than throw the whole thing out.
All right.
Probably not well, that's the thing too. Is a lot of times, people make the perfect the enemy of the good, and that's part of the reason compromise doesn't happen. If I don't get everything that I want, you see this, on both extremes. If I don't get everything that I want, then forget it, throw it all out.
Yeah.
That's let's go ahead and please, everybody, just vote for Andrew Yang. I don't agree with all of his policies. I don't agree with all of his policies.
Right.
He's the best option, and that's just pragmatically how you have to make your decisions in a democracy.
or how we should. That's for sure. Just if the only thing we leave people with is an option outside of sort of rampant tribalism, I think we will have done all right.
Yeah, and I guess just one more thing too, because I always want to root this stuff in evidence and reality, and try to avoid like ideological positions. So when it comes to I'm focused on making sure that every child has enough resources that they're able to, not be pulled down by poverty. They're able to reach their full potential. And, it's very expensive. Child poverty costs us, over $1 trillion per year. And the cost of eliminating child poverty was far below that. And, I just want to focus on saying that, if increasing income sufficiently decreases poverty, decreases inequality, decreases stress of parents, increases educational outcomes, and is effectively an ROI of $7 for every $1 spent eliminating child poverty, then what I care about is making sure that no child exists in poverty. And so if we have a viewpoint that says, well, it's the decision of the parent, and the parent only gets this much, and so I'm sorry that this kid will have to be raised in poverty, just have to live with it, then again, I'm focused on the actual results, and it's the evidence behind it that I really want to focus on. And because child poverty is so expensive that I don't care, I want to make sure everyone reaches their potential. Because again, another way of and really good argument for basic income too is what I call the Einstein cost, where if there's just one person that is not effectively the next Einstein because they're not receiving sufficient resources, then just think of like how different the world would be if Einstein had never existed. Like, what's the monetary cost of not having Einstein's existence? I don't even know how to calculate that, because everything that he did affected so much of our technology and our society. Mm-hmm. So if we can eliminate that and make sure that there is no Einstein cost, that every Einstein potential is able to become that, reach that potential, then all of us are just hugely better off. And I don't care about the ideologies that would, prevent that from happening because of something else. It's like, no, the overwhelming thing is that Einstein cost. Let's make sure that doesn't happen, because we want humanity to be better off. Humanity first.
Nailed it. And the math, I mean, that really, at the end of the day, that, even for people that, if your mindset is, hey, why should I be taking care of the kids of other people? That's the perfect workaround. I mean, if we educate an extra 1 million people at whatever the cost is, and only one of them is an Einstein level of intelligence, and at much lesser levels, 100,000 of them might be producing things that have never been seen before in the world. We are all just incalculably richer for it. Right. And as a back end result, you end child poverty. Oops. I mean, that's
right. We're all better off when we're all better off. It's just a simple way of thinking about this. And let's create the conditions where humanity is able to flourish. That's what I'm really interested in.
Absolutely. All right, Scott Santens, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate this a ton, and I'm sure we'll see you fighting the good fight on Twitter.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for having me, and good luck with the rest of your show and all the episodes that you've got still coming and planning. And hope you expand and find a big audience.
Thanks, man. I mean, Yang's the Yang gang is exploding. We are a tight group, so there you go.
Yep. Another reason for basic income, rallying people together.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, brother.
Take care.
Ciao.